And now I welcome Reverend Ivey to our pulpit for his message, and we will begin recording.
Thank you for the invitation today. I do appreciate it. I do appreciate the trust that you would invite a Baptist clergy into your presence and trust him with a 20-minute sermon. Now that really indicates a lot of trust. We'll see whether it is warranted or not. Do we have the slides up?
Yes.
Okay. What is white Christian nationalism, and what can we do about that? What is it, and what can we do? I want to try to be quick. I'm leaving time. I'm happy to join you for however long to discuss at the conclusion. You may challenge me. You may have clarifications. You may want to applaud. I don't know, but we'll be happy to have that conversation with you. So who do I represent? Christians Against Christian Nationalism is a national organization sponsored by the Baptist Joint Committee on Public Affairs. BJC is a longtime supporter of religious liberty for all. They've been sponsored by Baptists for over 80 years now, and they have joined in many challenges of those such as support for Jehovah's Witnesses, having space within public spaces to not be forced to practice. They have joined in the school prayer judgments of the early 1950s, saying, no, the public cannot force children to pray at the public expense. They have joined in many of those parts of the year, and so it's a different kind of being Baptist than what so many of my Baptist colleagues are today. I represent the Indiana affiliate of Christians Against Christian Nationalism, titled Religious Freedom Indiana. Religious Freedom Indiana. If you want to find us, rfindiana.org. And I would be happy for you to look at the resources and concerns that are there. We are actually a multi-faith and no-faith organization supporting religious freedom. So what's at stake? What is it that really is at issue today? The issue is, are we to be, as a nation, a multicultural, liberal, constitutional democracy? Or are we to be a monocultural, conservative, dictatorial autocracy? It's that simple. And people who try to blend those together and pretend like there is not a deep division of intention and belief structures are not paying attention. If you value multicultural, liberal in the sense of welcoming of many perspectives. Liberal is not the same as being a liberal Democrat or whatever. Liberal is a constitutional term for democracy. There is a stark choice in front of us. You can put that slide back up. The picture on the right is from the storming of the Capitol in 2021. I don't have it in this picture. I couldn't find a good picture of the other angles in which you would find all kinds of Christian symbols being carried in by these people invading the Capitol building because their choice for president wasn't elected. Over half of the people there were there as Christian nationalists, not as Republicans. Many of the leaders of Christian nationalist organizations were in Washington, many of them on Capitol Hill, though as far as can be determined, none invaded the Capitol. that day encouraging their people to go forward. That's what I mean by challenging democracy. We now see living in our presence autocracy at work at many levels of state and national government. This is a for-free comment. Thus, participation in here are really crucial. There are some, I think I'm one of them, but I have a little doubt, but there are some who believe that if the elections this year affirm the current administration, we will be a full-fledged autocracy within 2 years after that. We're that close at this point in time. Martin Luther King Jr. said of white Christians in the 1960s, they are sitting behind the anesthetizing power of stained glass windows. And that is still a good description of what white Christian nationalism does. Let me be clear. These neighbors have every right to their beliefs and how they live within their chosen communities. I'm not opposing their beliefs. They do not have the right to use those beliefs to push others out of the public square, to persecute and prosecute those who are different culturally than they are, and to require that all adopt their convictions and lifestyles in order to live in this United States. They don't have the right. But that is their objective. When you try to understand what Christian nationalism is really about, it is about who has power, and do I have the power to make you live as I think you ought to live? Hello? There we go. Oops. There are three joined forces at work in our country right now. I'm going to talk only about one of them, but need to acknowledge the others. These are different groups that have found common cause. There's big money from libertarian and autocratic men, folk who would be the American oligarchs, such as Elon Musk, many of the tech bros, oil and gas money, U.S. arms industry. Big money. And by the way, last year's income tax revisions, these folk made out big time. They got what they wanted. And that is deep reductions in their taxes. Others of us, we're so happy, we got $100 more back this year. And that is fool's gold that we need to know. Big money is at work. That's not new, but it's a particularly critical time in that. Second group would be the MAGA politics. These are centered around one man today, one man who thinks no problem of dressing up as Jesus and putting himself up on the internet. And he knew exactly what he was doing. These are represented by the Claremont Institute, by common good post-liberal conservatives, by traditional national conservatives. These are folk who believe that the U.S. is here for homogeneous people, homogeneous thought, and homogeneous lifestyles. I'm not going to talk about those folk. The third group is white Christian nationalists. White Christian nationalists believe that U.S. society ought to be ordered according to their convictions as to what a Christian life looks like. Order society by what we think a Christian society would look like. That's the group I'm going to talk more about. So what is white Christian nationalism? This statement is from the national organization Christians Against Christian Nationalism. Christian nationalism is a political ideology and cultural framework. Notice what I said. It's a political and cultural framework. It is not a Christian or a theological framework, but it goes under those rubrics, thereby getting broad acceptance among folk. A political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to merge American and Christian identities. You can put that slide back up. It suggests that real Americans are Christians, and true Christians hold a particular set of political beliefs. Christian nationalism demands Christianity be privileged by the state, and it implies that to be a good American, one must be a Christian. It often overlaps with and provides cover for white supremacy and racial segregation. I'll say more about that. Christian nationalism threatens American democracy, distorts America's promise of religious freedom for all, and distorts Christianity by taking the central message, a gospel of love, and turning it into a false idol of power. This is about power. It's not about anything other than, can I get power over you? So, what does a Christian nationalist sound like? Well, this is a great quote here. To me, God and country are tied. To me, they're one and the same. We were founded as a Christian country, and we see how far we have come from that. So, this is a typical statement. Notice it includes idolatry in the first sentence. That is, country and God are the same. That is as idolatrous a comment as any person could ever make. And then notice it lies in the second sentence by saying we were founded as a Christian nation. And they've even written textbooks that totally distort American history to prove that point. A brief excursus on that, just so you have it in your minds. The United States was in, the colonies that became the United States were indeed frequently founded on religious principles. There's no doubt that's true. The Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Pilgrims were of a Reformed Calvinistic tradition. They were not well received in England, had spent a good amount of time in jails there. They came here for freedom to found a state like themselves. That's true. For their own religious freedom. One of my Baptist ancestors, a man by the name of Roger Williams, changed his beliefs while a member of that colony, aligned more with Baptists, got himself thrown out of the colony in the middle of the winter, was saved by his Native American friends, founded the colony of Rhode Island, and there the first Baptist church in the United States was established. More importantly, in my mind, the first, or my Jewish friends say it's actually the second, synagogue in the United States was founded there. And the first Muslim mosque in the United States was founded in Rhode Island. Deep Baptists have a long history of religious freedom. The Baptists you see around you today, for the most part, not so much so. The colonies, yes. Virginia, for example, was clearly a Church of England colony. You had to belong to the Church of England to even be elected there. Couldn't run for office. So if our friends say we were founded as a Christian and they're looking at the colonies, there's actually a goodly amount of truth in that. Not total truth, but a goodly amount of truth. When you come to, but if we were founded by a Declaration of Independence and then by a Constitution. In the middle of that Constitution, and some of us point to the Bill of Rights as what's important. It's actually Article 6 of the Constitution that includes the statement, there shall be no religious test for public office. That was huge. Out of the colonies, over half of them had religious tests for public office. They had included those when they became states of the United States. That founding constitutional convention, those people had to go back to their states and say, we got to amend our Constitution. It took 40 years for some to do that, by the way. It was not overnight. But all changed that. You hear now talk that perhaps only those who are Christian should be elected. Those who are not Christian are denigrated. Our Jewish members of Congress, our non-religious members of Congress are denigrated by their colleagues. That's a shift. That is not where we want to be. You might be a Christian nationalist if you agree, and by the way, these 5 statements are what the best research about Christian nationalism in the United States use to determine, is this a Christian nationalist person or not? Being Christian is an important part of being truly American. Do you believe that or not? The U.S. government should declare that the U.S. is a Christian nation. U.S. laws should be based on Christian values. And if the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we will not have a country anymore. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of U.S. society. Those are the 5 key statements of a Christian nationalist. The research would say anyone who agrees with all 5 is a dedicated Christian nationalist. If you agree with 3 or 4, you're sympathetic to Christian nationalism. If you agree with 2 or less, you are not related to Christian nationalism. Over 30% of Americans agree with at least 4 of these statements. 30%. However, 70% of white evangelicals agree. 80% of white evangelicals voted Republican in 2016, 2020, and 2024. They form a voting bloc within Republican politics that we in Indiana should know very, very well. I hope you've been paying attention. The key, and it's not recent, by the way, our former Governor Pence passed legislation and signed legislation to restore Religious Restoration Act. Remember that? Basically saying, if you have Christian beliefs, you can do what you want. If you don't want to serve folk in your store, you don't have to serve folk in your store. If you don't want to support a gay marriage, you don't have to. That includes as a government official. You don't have to deal with that stuff. We are invested in Indiana in Christian nationalism in ways that are so deep that most of us don't see them. After-school programs are during-school programs for school children that use the most conservative curriculum you could possibly have to teach children. I'm one that I don't think release time for religious education should be there at all. But if you're going to have it, it should not be the most conservative available, which basically teaches the children, if a person's not Christian, don't deal with them, shun them. And then they go back into a classroom with children who were not released because their parents didn't want them to be for that purpose. And I suspect those of you who are parents, that would be most of you. You would not want your children to go to those things. But their classmates come back in the middle of the day having heard these things. No good can come of that other than division. Now, this is not new. Let's go backwards. The assault on the Capitol in 2021 was partially a Christian nationalist. The Religious Restoration Act that I just mentioned in many states of the early 2000s. Desegregation backlash in the 1960s and 70s was white Christian nationalism at work. I grew up in Kentucky and Tennessee. I know what it looked like. And by the way, the people who tried to keep their segregated schools and lost that argument are the same people that formed opposition to women's rights. The core to the anti-abortion movement were those same people. And it continues. No state-led prayer in public schools, backlash of the 1950s. The KKK of 1875 to 1900 and 1920 to 1935, something that especially the second coming of the KKK, again, as Indiana people, I hope you know well. It was embedded, KKK was a Christian nationalist organization, nothing more, nothing less. Science-faith controversy, the, quote, Scopes monkey trial of the 1925 was about, can my religious beliefs trump your teaching of science? By the way, the fundamentalists won that battle. They lost the war, but they've come back to try to reclaim it again. Civil War and Reconstruction resistance. White Christian nationalism at work. The Confederate, the Constitution for the Confederacy had in the first initial paragraph a statement of being a Christian state. Requirement to be a Protestant Christian for public office in many colonies and states. North American slavery was rooted in a Christian nationalism. The doctrine of discovery of 1452, which said, as European people take over unknown lands, if those people will convert to Christianity, great. If not, do with them as you wish. And that's literal. The Constantine, the Empire of Rome, from 1313 forward, almost all European states would be Christian nationalist states. This is not new. That's the point. When you ask, where did it come from? It comes from 2,000 years of history of Christians saying, we want power over everyone else. I'm trying to build it as big as I can so you understand the challenge that we have. Nationalists, Christian nation ideology, and Christians with reactionary authoritarian allegiances, and white Christian conservative evangelicals, Pentecostals, conservative Roman Catholics, and a few in all churches. It's not just a problem of evangelical. White mainline churches have also voted in allegiance with white Christian nationalism and MAGA over the last 3 elections. So what are the dangers? It threatens U.S. democracy. It distorts the U.S. promise of religious liberty for all. and it is lined with autocratic and authoritarian leaders. We can only hope that Hungary's rejection of Orbán signals a shift of public attitude. White Christian nationalism was at work in Hungary for 16 years. Still there, but other forces won at least that election. What can we do? Let me go on to the next one. To counter Christian nationalism, let me begin by saying, I do not encourage you to get in arguments with your family, neighbor, or other acquaintances about this. It will do no one any good. You're not going to out-argue a dedicated Christian nationalist. It ain't going to happen. Talk about the Pacers or the Colts or whatever you will, but not this. That's my main piece of advice to you. I know all of you, you know somebody you would like to convert. I know you yous aren't into conversion, but I know there's someone you want to convert. Don't even try it. Please, it gets no one anywhere. What can you do? First of all, ground yourself in love and humility and collaboration and nonviolence. Search out your own heart first. Know thyself. Second, understand the Christian nationalist practices and convictions and your alternative worldview. There are a couple of very good books. One by Amanda Tyler, How to End Christian Nationalism. Another by John Fugelsang, Separation of Church and Hate. A local author, Andrew Whitehead, who teaches at IUI, has written a book called American Idolatry. That is a very wise book. Learn what's at stake. This brief talk is not telling you enough. Learn what's at stake. And then to talk back, if anyone wants those repeated, I certainly will. 3, commit to religious liberty for all and separation of church and state. Know your own commitment at that level. Be present to it and be aware of the many dynamics seeking to cross that line. 4th, discuss with friends, relatives, associates using empathy and careful listening to their intentions for hope and justice. Notice what talk with empathy, seek understanding, not seeking to change somebody. 5, actively support a pluralistic democracy and multicultural community. If you're not engaged with others who are different than you, then don't complain about those who are not engaged with others different than them. Intervene when public spaces are threatened by Christian nationalists. In today's world, paying particular attention to our public schools and our public libraries and their ability to serve all people is one of the most important places to stand. There are others, but I would highlight those for you. If you find nothing else, see what's happening in your libraries and see what's happening in your schools, because that is where the shaping of the next generation is happening. And not making available good, effective communication around for children and youth who are trying to explore what does it mean to have these sexual feelings I have that seem different than everyone else. You know, if you want to condemn a community and push them down, don't provide information to them. That's the strategy. Pay attention to what's happening. Confront autocratic government actions and sanction oppressive violence. And 8, stand with marginalized and vulnerable persons and communities. Stand with our gay, our LGBTQ community. Stand with our African American community. Stand with our immigrants community, perhaps in this moment, maybe the most important. Stand with the immigrant community, both legally here and not legally here. We can debate how to deal with the not legally here, but if we don't stand with them for their human rights, we have forfeited many options to do, what Micah said. Love justice, practice mercy. Those are the communities that are there. Thank you for your attention. I will be happy to have any kind of conversation you want at the conclusion of the service.